I found out my wife was dead while my daughter was asleep in the next room, hugging the same stuffed owl Callista had sewn by hand years ago, the irony gnawing at my gut like acid. But death wasn't the shock. It was what came next. Callista had always kept her art studio locked, almost sacred, untouchable. "It's where I go to breathe," she used to whisper, as if even I couldn't be trusted with her air. But after the funeral, after the silence, after I stared at the locked door for 2 weeks straight, I decided to sell it. Walk away. Move on. Until I opened the door. And what I saw inside made me drop the keys and step back like I'd found a crime scene. Because I had. What Callista left behind wasn't grief. It was betrayal. Tangled in invoices, photographs, and secrets that had lived just a few feet from where I slept. That was the moment I stopped being a widower and started becoming someone else entirely. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I found out my wife was dead while my daughter was asleep in the next room, hugging the same stuffed owl Callista had sewn by hand years ago, the irony gnawing at my gut like acid. But death wasn't the shock. It was what came next. Callista had always kept her art studio locked, almost sacred, untouchable. "It's where I go to breathe," she used to whisper, as if even I couldn't be trusted with her air. But after the funeral, after the silence, after I stared at the locked door for 2 weeks straight, I decided to sell it, walk away, move on. Until I opened the door. And what I saw inside made me drop the keys and step back like I'd found a crime scene. Because I had. What Callista left behind wasn't grief. It was betrayal. Tangled in invoices, photographs, and secrets that had lived just a few feet from where I slept. That was the moment I stopped being a widower and started becoming someone else entirely. The morning Callista died, the call came from the front desk of Mount Sinai West. "Sudden cardiac arrest," they said. She collapsed in a private studio suite she'd rented in Midtown. I stood in the kitchen holding my phone, unable to make sense of the words, while eggs hissed in a cold pan. Gala padded in behind me with sleep in her eyes. "Is Mommy coming home for breakfast?" I had no answer. The days that followed were mechanical. Arrangements, condolences, flashbacks I didn't want. The funeral was held in Tribeca, small and selective, just like she would have wanted. Minimal floral arrangements, no pastel programs, just her urn, one blown glass sculpture, and a closed guest list. Ivy Crane spoke first. Of course she did. Slipped into all black, barely blinking, hands folded like a magazine cover. Callista was vision, untamed. She paused for effect. And fragile. I wanted to stand and rip that word out of her mouth. Fragile. Callista was fire. She just burned in places no one else could see. When the ceremony ended, Claire reached for my hand. "Come stay at ours," she said gently. "You and Gala need stillness." Stillness wasn't what I needed. I needed answers. 2 weeks passed. Every day I walked by the studio. We lived in Hudson Yards, minimalist glass, brass finishes, the kind of apartment Callista had insisted on when her exhibitions hit their stride. The studio was attached to the west side of the penthouse, technically mine, legally hers. She'd always treated it like a separate world, off limits. She never yelled, never locked it in front of me with aggression. but her voice would get quiet, dangerously quiet, if I even brushed against the doorknob. "I just need somewhere to be unfiltered," she'd say. "Somewhere without you in it." That should have been a red flag. I finally unlocked it on a Thursday. Gala was at school. Claire had offered to pick her up. I stood in front of the door for 3 minutes before turning the key. When the hinges creaked open, the air inside was still, not stale, but arrested, frozen in time. The scent of linseed oil, turpentine, and something sharp hit me all at once. At first glance, it looked like any high-end art studio. Easels, drop cloths, open shelving. I scanned the room expecting only paintings and pigment. What I found instead was a filing cabinet in the far corner, half concealed behind a canvas. The top drawer slid open too easily. Invoices. Personal letters. Photographs. The first thing I saw was a black and white photo of Callista smiling in a hotel suite I didn't recognize, her hand held gently by someone cropped out of frame. The next photo wasn't cropped. Varen Holt. I knew the face, vaguely. An attorney she once mentioned during a fight over our daughter's school enrollment forms. "He's just a legal consultant," she'd snapped. "Don't read into every man who responds to my emails." The third item was worse. A printed copy of an unsigned power of attorney document, placing all artistic rights and assets under Varen's temporary management, pending Noah Brooks's incapacitation. Me, not absence, not death. Incapacitation. I stepped back, breath caught in my throat. My hand brushed another folder, this one labeled Crimson. Inside were emails, design mock-ups, brand strategies, co-signed by Callista and Ivy Crane. They were planning something. A separate line of pieces, curated under a different name, filtered through a dummy LLC. I sat on the studio floor, surrounded by fragments of a life I thought I knew. The coldness wasn't from the marble tile beneath me. It was the chill of realizing I had shared a home and a child with a woman who had built entire continents of deceit while sleeping beside me. My phone vibrated in my pocket. "Claire, you okay?" she asked. Her voice was cautious, like she already knew I wasn't. "Can you keep Gala for the night?" I replied. "Noah, I just need a few hours." She hesitated. "We're here. Whatever you find, don't do it alone." I ended the call without answering. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I had the ghosts now. I pulled open the lower drawer of the cabinet. An external hard drive clinked against the metal frame, labeled in Sharpie, Studio G, Do Not Open. I slipped it into my pocket without thinking. My heart wasn't racing. It was steady, mechanical, like I was switching into someone I didn't know yet, someone who didn't cry, someone who calculated. I returned to the living room and poured a glass of water with hands that didn't shake. The skyline stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, glittering like nothing had changed. But everything had. The woman I buried wasn't just hiding a lover. She had built a fallback empire, without me, against me, possibly planning to erase me altogether. And now she was gone. No final confrontation. No apologies. No chance for her to lie to my face again. But she'd left her fingerprints behind. In files, in photos, in signatures. I turned on my laptop and plugged in the drive. The screen blinked once. Then a folder appeared. Crimson House Ltd. Legacy Materials. I opened it. What loaded wasn't just art. It was a business, a corporation, complete with pre-launch product designs, ad concepts, marketing deals in Callista's name. One folder marked Property Transfer detailed a transition plan that, had she not died, would have fully cut Gala and me out of any future estate. She was going to leave us behind, not emotionally, legally. My wife had died before she could erase me from her future, and all I could do now was stare at her handwriting and wonder. Did she ever plan to tell me? Or had I already been replaced? That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the window, watching lights flicker across the city. Somewhere out there, Varen Holt was living as if none of this had happened. Ivy Crane was probably sipping imported wine, already plotting her next curation. They thought Callista's death would protect them. They thought I'd grieve and go quiet. They were wrong. Because I wasn't mourning anymore. I was planning. The next morning, I woke up on the couch still wearing the same clothes. I hadn't meant to fall asleep, but exhaustion had blindsided me somewhere around 4 a.m., just after I'd finished scanning the final contract on Callista's hard drive. Crimson House Limited wasn't just an idea. It was already registered in Delaware. Documents showed Ivy Crane as the executive curator, Varen Holt as legal consultant, and Callista Wren, my wife, as the sole artistic visionary. But what made my stomach drop was the line listed under Legacy Protection Clause. In the event of the principal artist's sudden death, all residual works, rights, and revenues transfer to Ivy Crane for stewardship and final curation. Nothing, not one mention of Gala or me. They were planning to erase us, officially, permanently. By noon, I was at Ellis Varn's office on the Upper East Side, carrying a file folder I hadn't dared open since copying everything off the drive. Ellis was an old friend and my attorney, one of the few people who hadn't treated me like a broken widower after Callista died. He had handled our prenup, Gala's custody filings, and most of the estate planning, but I had never seen him look this tense. He flipped through the documents without speaking, his jaw tightening at every page. "You're sure this was hers?" "She labeled the drive herself," I said. "Her digital signature is on half those contracts." Ellis paused, then tapped one specific file with his index finger. "This one bothers me. A posthumous exhibition clause, standard language, but the clause includes licensing rights to all derivative works created under the Crimson umbrella. That means paintings made while she was with you too." "While she was with me," I repeated. The words made my throat close. He looked up. "This could be bigger than just betrayal, Noah. If Ivy filed these documents with intent to bypass your legal rights, it's fraud. And if Varen aided her, especially while handling any of your family's paperwork, we could be talking about criminal conflict of interest, civil and criminal exposure." I leaned forward. "Can we stop it?" Ellis narrowed his eyes. "If they've already initiated transfers, we'll need to prove Callista was misled or that she didn't act independently. But based on this language, she wasn't coerced. She was complicit." I felt like I'd been punched. Part of me had clung to the idea that she was tricked, that Ivy had manipulated her, that Varen had blurred boundaries. But this clause made it clear. Callista had known exactly what she was doing. I swallowed the burn in my throat. "Then we do this the hard way?" Ellis gave a small nod. "I'll draft a hold on the estate, freeze all transfers, and request temporary injunctions through family court." "And Gala?" I asked. "Can Ivy or anyone else come for custody?" Ellis's eyes met mine sharply. "They won't touch Gala. She's your daughter, biologically and legally." I froze. "What do you mean, biologically?" He blinked. "You didn't know?" "Ellis, I assumed you had the test done already. You listed her as yours in the estate will, so I thought—" "I never questioned it." Ellis paled. "Noah, you need to get a DNA test. Now, if Callista's actions were designed to separate you from Gala financially, she may have had plans beyond money. Ivy could argue next of kin if Gala isn't—" I stood up before I realized it. "Get the court paperwork started. I'll take care of the rest." Back home, Gala was in her room painting when I returned. Claire had brought over lunch, and they were playing music in the background, some French indie band Callista used to love. I knocked on the doorframe. "Can I borrow Gala for a walk?" Claire turned, catching something in my face. "Of course." We took the elevator down to the High Line and walked for 15 minutes without saying anything. Gala was clutching her little owl plush in one hand, her other hand in mine. Eventually, I asked gently, "Do you remember anyone your mom used to spend a lot of time with when I wasn't around?" She shrugged. "Sometimes we'd go to her friend Ivy's house. It was boring." "And anyone else?" "There was a man. Varen." She frowned. "He always smelled like old paper." I felt bile rise in my chest. "Did he ever come to our apartment?" She shook her head. "Only to the studio. But Mommy said I couldn't talk about him to you. She said it was a secret grown-up project." I stopped walking. "Sweetheart, I need to ask you something, and it might feel weird, but it's just to protect you, okay?" She nodded. "I need to take a test. Just to make sure everything's in order with your school paperwork. It's like checking blood types. You know how doctors do that?" She nodded again, less certain. "I just need a quick cheek swab. Won't hurt at all." Later that night, when she was asleep, I sealed the DNA test kit and dropped it at the express lab myself. They promised results within 48 hours. I didn't sleep. I paced. By Saturday morning, the results arrived by email. My heart thundered as I opened the file. Paternity 99.999% match. She was mine. I stared at the screen, lightheaded with relief and something sharper, ownership, not in the controlling sense, but in the primal, protective way that only a father can feel after nearly losing everything. Callista may have betrayed me, but she hadn't taken Gala from me, not yet. That afternoon, I received an invitation in the mail, embossed paper, no return address. Inside was a formal card. Crimson, an exclusive preview event, Wednesday, April 23rd, hosted by Ivy Crane. Location, the Wren House Gallery. I clenched my jaw. She named the gallery after Callista, publicly, shamelessly, and she sent me an invite. I immediately called Core Wild. He picked up on the second ring. "Didn't expect to hear from you so soon." "Ivy's launching Crimson next week. I want you to get me everything, financial backers, silent partners, donor records, anything I can use." Already started digging. "But Noah, this runs deeper than you think." "What do you mean?" "I found a Shell LLC in Panama registered under Victor Crane's name, Ivy's father. He's been moving assets into Crimson for months." "Why?" "Because Crimson was never about art. It's a money-cleaning mechanism. Your wife's name gave it legitimacy. You and Gala? You were just collateral." I closed my eyes, rage building. "Send me everything." I'm done watching from the outside. 3 days later, I sat across from Ellis again. He had folders stacked on his desk, a legal pad with notes scribbled in shorthand. "We have enough to petition the court for an injunction against Ivy Crane and Crimson House Looted. I've filed emergency motions." "And the gallery event?" "I can't stop it," he said. "But if we play this right, we can crash it." "How?" Ellis leaned forward. "We let her go through with it. Let her display the stolen pieces. Then we hit her with a cease and desist in front of her backers. And if Core can pull the Panama Shell link, we get the media involved. And Varen?" Ellis smiled for the first time. "Varen's bar license is still active. If we catch proof of dual representation, Callista and Ivy, we can shred his legal credibility." I felt something settle inside me. Not revenge. Clarity. Purpose. For the first time since Callista died, I knew exactly what I needed to do, and I wasn't doing it out of anger. I was doing it because they tried to erase my name and my daughter's future with forged documents and curated lies. But now, we were the ones writing the next chapter. 3 days before Ivy's exclusive Crimson event, I walked into the Wren House Gallery unannounced. The assistant at the front desk, young, polished, clearly chosen for appearances, gave me a wary glance as I stepped inside, my shoes echoing against the polished marble floor. "I'm sorry, the gallery's closed for a private event installation," she said, folding her arms. "I'm not here to browse," I said, flashing my business card. Noah Brooks. I'm the surviving spouse of Callista Wren. That made her blink. A second later, Ivy Crane appeared from the interior corridor, wearing a slate-gray blazer, her platinum hair pulled tight into a bun. She looked surprised for exactly half a second, then smiled like a fox seeing a rabbit too slow to run. "Noah," she said smoothly. "How unexpected. I need 10 minutes. Your timing is convenient. We're finalizing placements. Come, walk with me." I followed her into the main gallery. The space was pristine. Matte white walls, high ceilings, beams of soft light striking framed canvases that I instantly recognized as Callista's. But they were rearranged, reinterpreted, stripped of their original names. The collection was labeled the Veil Series, with each piece renamed something absurdly abstract. Phantom Silence, Inheritance in Echo, Disorder No Now 7. Interesting curation, I said dryly. I had to give the public something digestible, Ivy replied, not looking at me. Callista's raw vision was intense. I've softened the presentation. You had no legal right to repurpose her work, let alone rename it. I do now, she said, pausing by a long, sweeping canvas. She signed over usage rights before she passed. I've checked everything. Twice. I stepped closer. Callista and I were still legally married when she died. No divorce, no amendment to our estate, which means you're displaying stolen work and using it to launch a fraudulent LLC. Ivy turned to face me. Her smile didn't waver. You sound angry. Grief manifests in strange ways. No, Ivy, theft does. You think you can erase me and my daughter and repackage my wife's legacy as some branded concept for the elite? That you can hang her soul on these walls and call it interpretation? She looked amused. Your reaction is noted. I took a breath. I'm filing a cease and desist. Legal notice will be delivered before your event begins. Anything sold or licensed under this banner will be frozen. And Varen Holt, he's under investigation. For the first time, her smile dropped half an inch. She composed herself quickly. I've done nothing illegal. I turned to leave. Then you won't mind the cameras. Back outside, I called Cor Wild. She's doubling down. I need media coverage, quiet at first, strategic leaks. I've already got someone at the Observer interested, he said, and a blogger who tracks art fraud cases in elite circuits. I'll feed them images of the renamed series and the crimson clause about excluding the biological family. Perfect. What about Varen? I pulled his property records. He has a penthouse in Soho paid for by an untraceable trust, originating from an offshore account tied to Ivy's father, Victor Crane. You're telling me Victor's laundering money through Varen, who's laundering it through Ivy, who repackaged Callista's art as a boutique collection? Exactly. How deep are we? Cor paused. You're not dealing with art collectors. You're dealing with a multi-tiered fraud mechanism that used Callista's brand to create legitimacy. I felt my stomach twist. And if we expose it all, how bad does it get? Felony bad. For them. That evening, I sat down with Gala in the living room. I didn't want to involve her, but the moment was coming fast when she'd overhear or sense everything unraveling. She looked up from her sketchbook, where she'd drawn a ballerina with wings. Dad? Yeah, honey? Are we going to be okay? The question hit like a bat to the ribs. She didn't know the details, but she could feel the tension. We are, I said, kneeling beside her. No one is taking anything from us, I promise. Not even Mommy's paintings? I hesitated. Especially not those. She frowned. Miss Claire said Mommy used to get scared sometimes, like something was chasing her but inside. I blinked. She said that? Gala nodded. She said Mommy didn't talk about it much, but that she used her paintings to make it stop. It wasn't the first time I'd heard something like that. Callista had always been evasive about her past. I used to think it was just the artist in her, private, intense. But now I wondered what ghosts she had buried. And if Ivy had dug them up for leverage. The next day, I got a call from Ellis. "They're trying to file a counter motion," he said. "Ivy's legal team just submitted documents asserting ownership over the Veil series based on creative reinterpretation under LLC licensing. They're playing the New Vision card. She's gaslighting an entire legal process." "Yes, but we have a leak." Ellis paused. "Someone inside the Crimson planning team just sent me an unredacted budget file. It lists a phantom commission from Callista's personal account 6 weeks before her death, $250,000 wired to a nonprofit that doesn't exist. That's fraud. Even better, it's proof that someone moved Callista's money using falsified nonprofit status, which ties back to Victor Crane's laundering structure. What does that mean for us? It means we don't just have a civil case. We have criminal intent. And you, as her spouse, have standing. On the day of the gallery event, I wore a black suit and showed up 10 minutes before opening, just as the final guests were being escorted in. Ivy spotted me immediately and approached with a cold glare. "You're not invited," she hissed. "I'm not here for wine and cheese," I said. "Your notice should be arriving in now." As if on cue, a process server entered behind me and handed her the cease and desist envelope. Ivy's face went pale. "You won't get away with this," she whispered. "You already didn't." I stepped aside, and Core entered, camera in hand. He wasn't subtle. He was filming everything. As Ivy stormed off, Varen Holt appeared from the back of the gallery. He looked 10 years older than the last time I saw him, tight around the eyes, skin too pale. He didn't speak. He just stared at me, realization dawning that everything was slipping through his fingers. I gave him a nod. "You should start thinking about your license." Or what's left of it. He didn't respond. I didn't need him to. That night, headlines ran quietly but definitively across a handful of art world blogs and legal news platforms. Crimson House exhibition halted by spouse of late artist amidst ownership dispute. Whistleblower reveals alleged art laundering scheme tied to NYC elite gallery circuit. Exclusive, Victor Crane's financial shell under investigation after legal filings reveal suspicious transfers. The exposure wasn't viral, but it was enough to shift the winds. Gala was asleep when I got home. Claire was reading on the couch. "How'd it go?" she asked. "It's begun." "Good," she said quietly. She deserved better than to be stripped and rebranded. "She did," I said, glancing toward Gala's door. "And Gala deserves a legacy that's hers, not one buried under fraud." Claire stood and hugged me. "You're doing right by both of them." I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure if I was doing it for Callista anymore. I was doing it for the part of me that refused to be erased. 2 days after the cease and desist froze Ivy's gallery launch, I received a letter via courier, stamped with her attorney's insignia and sealed in a thick cream envelope. I opened it on my kitchen counter with Claire watching from across the room. Her arms were folded, face unreadable. Inside was a formal notice. Ivy Crane and Varen Holt were filing a joint counterclaim against the estate of Callista Wren, alleging that Noah Brooks had obstructed the execution of Callista's posthumous wishes, a strategy meant to flip the optics and paint me as the unstable, grieving husband, blocking his wife's final legacy. "She's playing offense," Claire said, reading over my shoulder. "She's panicking," I corrected, "and throwing legal darts in the dark." I handed the papers to Ellis the moment I stepped into his office. He read them twice, then placed the envelope flat on his desk and exhaled hard. "This isn't just defense," he muttered. "They're trying to publicly reframe your entire marriage, paint you as controlling, emotionally unstable. They're banking on social sentiment. Can they make it stick? Not if we beat them to the punch." He slid a folder toward me, full of depositions, financial logs, and something new, a sworn affidavit from a former Crimson intern. The girl had anonymously emailed Core Wild a week ago. Her statement detailed witnessing Ivy forging Callista's name on at least 2 licensing forms after her death, and hearing Ivy say, "The husband's irrelevant now. Callista gave me what matters." I leaned forward. She's admitting intent to erase me. "And using it to build her brand," Ellis added. "We'll attach this to the estate injunction and submit it to the DA's office. If Ivy's forged anything posthumously, especially for profit, that's criminal fraud." He stood. "But there's one thing I need from you, Noah." "What?" "Be ready to be dragged publicly." They didn't waste time. Within 24 hours, Ivy's PR team pushed a carefully coordinated press campaign. Noah Brooks, grieving husband of late artist Callista Wren, obstructs memorial exhibition, citing personal control and emotional breakdown. The press release ran in 3 online art publications and was picked up by 2 mainstream lifestyle blogs. The accompanying photo showed me standing in the gallery doorway from the day of the cease and desist, grim-faced, arms crossed, looking every bit the brooding, difficult widower. Gala saw it while scrolling on Claire's tablet and asked, "Why is that picture of you on the internet?" Claire quickly shut the screen, but it was too late. Gala was already watching me. I knelt beside her. Sometimes people say things that aren't true to make themselves look better. That's what Ivy's doing. Gala nodded slowly, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. She was 8, but far from naive. The next night, I met Core at a rooftop bar in Tribeca, the kind that catered to the post-deal finance crowd and cost $35 for a single scotch. We sat in a shadowed corner booth while Core pulled out his laptop. "I broke into the digital back end of Crimson's donor system," he said, "and look what I found." He clicked open a spreadsheet. It listed donor names, tier levels, donation amounts, and something else. A silent column with checkboxes. That column marked which donors requested not to be publicly affiliated. 2 stood out: Varen Holt and Victor Crane. The amounts: $500,000 each. One dated 7 months before Callista's death. The other, just 4 weeks after. They pumped cash in under anonymity, then repurposed her work and built Crimson on her legacy, Core said. "We also traced the Panama shell you flagged. It's linked to 3 other art fronts in Miami, Austin, and Santa Fe." "This wasn't a passion project," I said. "It was a laundering machine. And you were the inconvenient detail." "Not anymore." I left the bar that night with a printout of the donor sheet and Core's assurance he'd loop in a federal contact who specialized in cultural fraud cases. If we could prove that Ivy and Varen funneled dirty money into Crimson and used my wife's name to front it, we had them cornered. The next escalation came fast and hard. I received a subpoena to appear in family court. Ivy Crane was seeking legal guardianship over Gala. The pretext was grotesque, that Callista's trusted partner, Ivy, had been promised guardianship in private, that I had been emotionally unstable since the death, and that Gala would benefit from a familiar maternal figure in her late mother's creative circle. It made me want to break something. Ellis responded instantly. "They're bluffing, Noah. Gala is biologically yours. Callista left no written modification to the guardianship terms. They're just trying to hit you where it hurts, hoping to make you crack in public." "They won't touch her," I said, jaw clenched. "They won't," Ellis affirmed. "But you're going to have to testify." The courtroom was clinical, glass and chrome. Ivy sat on the other side of the aisle in a navy blazer and soft pearls, looking like a perfectly contrived benefactor. Varen wasn't with her. He'd been silent since the gallery fallout. When it was my turn to testify, I stood and walked to the stand with everything I had left holding my spine up straight. Ellis asked the basics: name, relation to Gala, marital status with Callista at the time of death. Then he opened the door. Mr. Brooks, were you aware of any plan by your wife to assign guardianship of your daughter to Miss Ivy Crane?
No, I said flatly. Callista and I agreed years ago that if anything happened to either of us, Gala would remain with the other. There were no alternates.
Did Mrs. Crane spend significant time with your daughter? Rarely. Gala barely remembers her. And what, in your view, motivates this claim? I looked straight ahead. Publicity and power. Ivy flinched slightly, then crossed her legs. The judge nodded and motioned to Ivy's side. Her attorney offered a watered-down argument about emotional continuity and Callista's vision, but it was clear they were grasping. The judge's decision came down 3 days later. Guardianship request denied. It was more than a win. It was a turning point, because it showed the cracks in Ivy's entire narrative. She had just tried to take my daughter and failed in open court. In the days that followed, things began to collapse around her. An anonymous tip surfaced on social media, alleging Crimson's formation involved questionable estate transfers and internal fraud. A whistleblower from within Ivy's own board leaked internal memos showing Ivy's knowledge of Callista's declining mental health, but also her insistence that Callista remain publicly vibrant for marketing purposes. In one message, Ivy wrote, "If she unravels, it hurts the brand. Keep her out of the press unless she's painting." I read the line 3 times and nearly punched the wall. I had wondered for months whether Callista's health had been slipping more than I knew, whether she'd hidden things from me, whether Ivy had exploited that. Now I knew the answer. She didn't just witness Callista fall apart. She profited from it. Then came the moment I hadn't expected. Varen Holt reached out. He emailed Core anonymously, requesting a private meeting. We agreed. One night, Core and I met Varen in the back of a midtown cafe. He looked disheveled, eyes sunken. "I can't live like this," he said quietly. "I didn't know Ivy would push it this far." "You knew enough to cash checks and bury evidence," Core said coldly. "I want to come clean. I'll testify." "You'll do more than that," I said. "You'll give us the emails, contracts, shell files, everything. If you want a deal, you bring the fire." Varen nodded. "I already backed it up on a drive. I'll send it to Ellis." And he did. 2 days later, Ellis handed me the contents. Dozens of signed agreements between Ivy, Varen, and Crimson donors. Payments disguised as grants. Licensing agreements forged. A clause stating Ivy would assume curatorial authority even in the absence of legal ownership. It was over. The moment we went public, they'd fall like dominoes. But I wasn't ready to pull the trigger yet, not until I gave them one last taste of exposure. In their own arena, a week later, a private auction was held in Montauk for one of the remaining Callista pieces, the Inheritance in Echo painting Ivy had renamed. It was scheduled as a limited invite-only event for ultra-wealthy collectors. I worked with Core and Ellis to plant a deep leak, one that ensured the press would be there. I arrived 10 minutes before bidding began. And when Ivy saw me enter, holding a court order and a full set of fraud exhibits, she didn't even try to smile. She froze. And for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She knew. The curtain had finally ripped open, and the world was about to see who was really behind it. The Montauk auction wasn't just another Crimson event. It was Ivy's attempt to reassert dominance. An exclusive, invite-only gala where elites gathered to bid on restored cultural treasures. At the top of the catalog was Inheritance in Echo, the centerpiece she'd stolen from my wife's legacy. But this time, I wasn't coming to observe. I was coming to end everything. Ellis and Core met me in the parking structure beneath the event space. It was built like a fortress, glass walkways above, heavy soundproofing, and layers of security. Core handed me the final packet. Authenticated documents from the IRS case liaison, whistleblower depositions,
digital logs, and Varen Holt's signed testimony. "Are you ready?" Ellis asked. I stared up toward the entrance where Ivy was undoubtedly sipping champagne, posing beside a painting she'd renamed and repackaged. "I've never been more ready." We walked in through the rear access corridor. Inside, the space was bathed in soft light, the kind designed to make rich people feel insulated from consequence. Waiters floated by with flutes of Prosecco. The air smelled of white truffle and designer fabric. At the far end, Ivy stood in a sapphire gown, smiling for cameras, pretending nothing was crumbling beneath her. She hadn't seen me yet. I motioned to Core, who slipped into the crowd, passing discreet folders to select members of the press and one to a federal agent embedded nearby. Ellis took position beside the stage. This wouldn't be just a private exposure, it would be the beginning of the unraveling in full view. Then Ivy saw me, and for the first time in all of this, she blinked like she'd been hit. I walked toward her without hesitation. "Noah," she said, her voice tense behind a rehearsed smile. "This isn't the venue." "No," I said flatly. "It's the perfect one." I reached into my jacket and handed her a bound packet of court files and federal exhibits. "These were just delivered to your counsel. Fraudulent licensing, posthumous forgery, racketeering through a 501c3, and Varen," he flipped, "gave us everything." Her hand trembled as she accepted the pages. "You came here to sell my wife's legacy, but what you've actually done, publicly, is commit career suicide." She didn't respond. Behind her, whispers were already spreading. One journalist stepped back, clicking furiously on a phone. Another murmured to a guest from Sotheby's. Within seconds, the tide had turned. And then came the final strike. Ellis stepped onto the stage as if to make an announcement, but instead of presenting the next auction lot, he tapped the microphone once. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ellis Varn, legal counsel for the estate of Callista Wren. I've been authorized to disclose the following. The artwork presented tonight under the Crimson House label is currently under criminal investigation for posthumous forgery and fraud." Gasps rippled through the room. Phones came out. Bidders froze. Ellis continued, "The estate has filed civil and federal motions against Crimson House, Ivy Crane, and her backers for unlawful profit, defamation, and fraud." Security instinctively moved toward Ivy, who was now visibly trembling. "This auction," Ellis said, "is hereby void." And just like that, the curtain came down. I left before the press could swarm, slipping into the cool night air and heading back toward the city. Claire texted, "Gala's asleep. All calm here. Take a breath." You did it. But it didn't feel like victory yet. It felt like the beginning of the reckoning. The following morning, news exploded. Crimson collapse. Art empire implodes amid forgery scandal. Ivy Crane under fire for estate fraud. Exploitation allegations. Whistleblower confirms Wren legacy was hijacked. Within 72 hours, Ivy Crane's board of directors voted unanimously to suspend her from all curatorial and financial duties pending the outcome of the investigation. Crimson House's flagship gallery shut down temporarily. Sponsors withdrew. A federal audit was announced. Varen Holt issued a statement admitting failure to uphold transparency and agreeing to cooperate fully in exchange for leniency. Ivy, on the other hand, stayed silent until she couldn't. A week later, I received a request from her attorney. Ivy wanted to meet. "Why?" I asked Ellis. "She's cornered," he said. "She wants to cut a deal." I agreed, on one condition. The meeting would be recorded and admissible in court. She arrived at Ellis's office in all black, no makeup, and a scarf wrapped tight around her neck like she was still trying to hold something in. I sat across from her without saying a word. She finally spoke. "I didn't kill her, Noah." I raised an eyebrow. Is that what this is about? She was spiraling. Callista wouldn't let me help her. Wouldn't let anyone in. She stopped taking her meds. She drank too much. I tried. No, I cut her off. You used her. You fed on her collapse. You convinced her you were her savior, then monetized every part of her after she died. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't move. I thought I loved her, she whispered, and she loved me. But then she stayed with you. She kept you in the will. She chose you. I didn't need to say anything. She'd confessed the core of her betrayal without realizing it. Jealousy. That was always the root. Jealousy disguised as legacy. I want to avoid a full trial, she said. You won't, Ellis responded coolly. But if you plead guilty, testify against Victor Crane, and dissolve Crimson, the DA may consider reduced sentencing. She looked at me. Do you want that? You want to see me behind bars? I didn't blink. I want Gala to grow up knowing her mother's name wasn't a product line. I want my daughter to look at that painting and know it came from love, not corruption. Ivy didn't argue. She just nodded, then signed the agreement. 2 weeks later, she entered a plea of guilty to 3 felony counts: fraud, forgery, and tax evasion. Crimson House dissolved by court order. Her assets were liquidated to pay damages and back taxes. She would serve 2 years minimum in federal prison. Victor Crane, exposed through Varen's files, was indicted separately for laundering over $12 million through art entities using shell companies and anonymous charitable fronts. His sentencing would follow. And just like that, the empire they built on my wife's bones crumbled in front of the world. I kept my distance from the media. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. My statement was a photograph. Gala and I standing in front of Callista's final self-portrait, now restored, properly credited, and returned to the permanent collection of the MoMA where it belonged. That image spoke for everything I refused to say. Claire came with us that day. She stood beside Gala, holding her hand as I gave the museum the licensing contract that reclaimed my wife's legacy under her own name, no longer Crimson Collection, but simply the Wren Works. She'd be proud, Claire said softly. No, I said. She'd be free. Weeks passed. The dust settled. Our home grew quieter. I resumed my architecture consulting, one project at a time. Nothing grand, just stable. Gala started 3rd grade and never asked about Ivy again. She called Claire Aunt Claire now. On weekends, we painted together in the studio, the same studio that once scared me to open. Now, it felt like sacred ground. One evening, Gala sat cross-legged by the window with her sketchpad and asked, "Will Mommy always be famous?" I smiled gently. She was never trying to be famous. She just wanted to tell the truth on canvas. Gala nodded, then whispered, "I want to do that too." The last time I saw Ivy was on the courthouse steps, handcuffed, escorted by marshals into a waiting car. Her expression was vacant, her face pale. No cameras flashed, no one shouted questions. She was forgotten as quickly as she rose, and that was the real justice. Not just punishment, but erasure of the lie. The truth, though, the truth lived on. In Gala. In the restored name etched beneath every painting. In the studio she once forbade me from entering because she knew it wasn't finished yet. Because she knew someday I'd need to step inside and rewrite the ending. The headlines moved on quickly, as they always do. By the 2nd week of Ivy's sentencing, media outlets shifted to a celebrity divorce, a tech scandal, and a Senate hearing. The news cycle no longer revolved around the woman who tried to rewrite my wife's legacy with a forged signature and a wine-soaked smile. But for me, and for Gala, it wasn't over. Not yet. Closure didn't come in press releases or public apologies. It came in silence.
in the in-between moments, where truth and grief quietly collided. We were sitting on the living room floor when Gala looked up and asked, "Was Mommy really sick before she died?" I didn't answer right away. I had prepared myself for this question for months, and yet, when it arrived, I still wasn't ready.
She was, I said finally. Not just in her body, but in her mind, too. Gala nodded, tracing the corner of a paintbrush against her knee. Was she sad? Sometimes. But she loved you every single day, even on the hard ones. She leaned into my side, her small frame pressing into mine like a puzzle piece finding its place. I wish I could remember her better. I kissed the top of her head.
That's why we have her art. It remembers for you. Ellis called the next morning. We've received a formal settlement proposal from Crimson House's liquidators, he said. It includes full restitution, Callista's artwork returned with corrected provenance, and transfer of all remaining digital and legal rights to the Wren estate. I let out a long breath. What aren't they saying? They're trying to avoid a permanent public record linking Victor Crane's laundering operation to Ivy's foundation. If we agree, they'll seal parts of the financial report. And if we don't, they risk prosecution and deeper civil liability. Have they included any statement of accountability? Yes. Ivy Crane will submit a written apology. Not for press, not for court. Just for you and Gala. For a moment I didn't speak. Then I said, I want to read it. The letter came in a flat envelope, no return address, just one page, handwritten in her signature angular scrawl. To Noah and Gala, I don't expect forgiveness. I know what I did, and I live inside that shadow now. Callista was more than a friend, more than an artist. I betrayed her. I betrayed you. I let grief twist into greed, and love rot into control. What I tried to build was never mine to begin with. I see that now. I hope someday Gala can remember her mother's name without seeing mine attached. I'm sorry, Ivy Crane. I stared at it for a long time, not because it changed anything, but because for the first time it didn't try to manipulate or deflect. It was just bare. Gala never asked to read it. I didn't offer. I folded it once, sealed it in a folder, and placed it at the back of Callista's studio, behind the legal binders, past the inventory lists, between 2 volumes of her journals. Let it stay buried there, where it belonged. Weeks later, Claire helped me pack up the last remnants of Crimson's branded paraphernalia. We donated what could be salvaged to nonprofit community art programs. Core Wild burned the remaining data drives and wiped our security backups. I asked him why. Because some ghosts shouldn't live on USB, he said. The only thing I kept was the final canvas, the one Callista had hidden under brown paper in the corner of the studio, behind 4 panels and a sealed drawer. I found it the same day the gallery collapsed. I hadn't touched it until now. When I unwrapped it, my breath caught. It wasn't abstract or expressionist or full of sharp motion like her other work. It was quiet, simple, a soft oil rendering of Gala asleep, her little hand tucked under her cheek, the corner of Callista's robe in the frame, painted as if from her own point of view. She hadn't painted it for an audience. She'd painted it to remember, to hold on. That's when I knew it was time. Time to restore, not just her reputation, but her studio, her sanctuary, and pass it on. I brought Gala in the next afternoon, her art supplies in a tote bag, her curls tied back like Callista used to wear hers. This was Mommy's favorite place, I told her. She didn't let you come in. No, I said, smiling softly. But now it's yours. She looked around, wide-eyed. The room was still full of her mother's scent. Linseed oil, paper dust, dried flowers. She walked to the middle, set down her sketch pad, and sat cross-legged on the floor. Do you think she'd want me to make something in here? I crouched beside her,
brushing a piece of lint from her shoulder. I think she hoped you would. In March, we hosted a private unveiling at the restored studio. Only 10 people attended. No press, no collectors. Just a few of Callista's closest former peers, 2 curators, Claire, and one of her former professors. Ellis stood in the corner, quietly observing, while Gala tugged on my sleeve every few minutes to ask when we could go get cupcakes. It wasn't a relaunch. It wasn't a statement. It was a return. One curator from MoMA approached me after viewing the main wall. She painted this one just before the Guggenheim show, she said. It was pulled at the last minute. Ivy told us it was damaged. I nodded. She lied. She said a lot of things. She told us Callista was afraid to exhibit anything with family in it, that she wanted her work to be anonymous, separate from personal identity. I turned toward her. My wife never wanted to be anonymous. She stared at the portrait of Gala for a long moment. It's her most vulnerable work. It's her truth. The Wren estate entered a new phase that spring. We created an endowment, not to commercialize, but to protect. Every new exhibition had to be vetted through a foundation run by Claire, myself, and Gala, once she came of age. No one could license, distribute, or modify without approval. We took Callista's name back from the people who tried to sell it, but more importantly, we gave Gala the freedom to grow without the weight of false history. At night, she sometimes painted in silence. Sometimes she laughed and hummed. Sometimes she asked me to sit with her and just watch. Always, I said yes. There was one last thread I had to cut. Victor Crane's trial concluded in late June. 3 counts of laundering. 2 shell companies exposed. One anonymous fund that had backed Ivy's gallery since its inception revealed to be a front to hide payments made through Callista's earlier royalties. The judge sentenced him to 9 years in federal prison. The courtroom was silent. Ivy's name never came up again. She was already serving her sentence. She'd become a ghost in her own downfall. I didn't attend the sentencing. Instead, I took Gala to the botanical garden that day. We walked the maze, fed koi, and sat under the stone arch where Callista once took a photo of us when Gala was just 2. That was what healing looked like. Not revenge, just peace. Earned peace. One afternoon, a letter arrived, this time from an old critic who had once trashed Callista's first gallery show in a major magazine. He admitted he'd been wrong, that her early work had startled him into dismissal, and that, in retrospect, her layering and interiority were light years ahead of her contemporaries. He asked if I would allow him to write a retrospective. I said no. Let history speak through the work itself. Let Callista speak in paint, not in quotes she never gave. At the beginning of this journey, I thought justice meant burning Ivy to the ground. I thought vindication meant loud wins, public statements, courtroom confessions. But the truth is, real justice is quieter than that. It's a daughter painting beside the memory of her mother. It's a man walking into a studio without breaking. It's a name returned. Unbought, unbent, unbroken. The air inside Callista's studio was different now. Lighter, somehow. Not because anything had changed drastically. The sunlight still filtered through the same cracked window pane. The scent of paint and linseed oil still lingered in the floorboards. The brushes were where she left them, and the canvas she never finished still leaned quietly in the corner, untouched. But the weight was gone. Not the grief. That remained, as it always would, braided into memory. But the weight, the tension, the secrets, the clawing silence, that was gone. For the first time since Callista's death, the studio was breathing again. So was I. Gala's laughter echoed down the hall, mixing with the gentle scrape of a brush on canvas. She was working on her 3rd painting, this one abstract, bold, and completely her own. She didn't paint like her mother, not yet. She didn't try to imitate her, either. That was the part I loved most. She stood on her own. She didn't carry the burden of betrayal.
She wouldn't remember Ivy Crane as anything other than a name she once heard adults whisper about when they thought she wasn't listening. And Callista? Callista would live in Gala's heart as a warm presence, not a mystery, not a martyr, a mother. One morning in early September, I opened the last remaining box in the corner of our guest room, one I had sealed myself over a year ago. Inside were pieces of Callista's early life, sketchbooks from college, old Polaroids, rejection letters from galleries that didn't yet understand her style, and 2 letters she wrote but never sent, one addressed to her father, the other to herself. They weren't dramatic, just honest. The kind of honesty you write when you think no one's looking. The kind that makes you ache in quiet places. I scanned through her notebook margins where she'd scribbled thoughts between paint swatches. I don't want to be a name people profit from. I want to be a soul that resonates. Legacy isn't about walls, it's about echoes. If they forget my face but remember the feeling, then I've done something real. She had. And now, people remembered the feeling, not just in galleries or exhibitions, but in Gala's eyes when she smiled.
Ivy Crane was never mentioned again in art circles. Her gallery was officially absorbed into a foundation for art therapy in underserved communities, restructured through the restitution clause negotiated by Ellis. Not for prestige, not for headlines, just quiet usefulness. It was the last deal I made in her name. Victor Crane's sentence stuck. 9 years, no parole. Every trace of Crimson's capital trails had been exposed and documented. Ellis made sure of it. Claire ensured it stayed in public record. They had used Callista's name to fund an empire. We dismantled it with her truth. There was a poetic symmetry in that. Not revenge. Restoration. The city moved on, as cities do. New scandals, new icons, new distractions. But for me, time didn't move forward so much as widen. It gave me space to breathe again. Space to fill with mornings that weren't drenched in suspicion, with afternoons that weren't guarded by lawyers or investigators. It was strange at first, living without a war to fight. Then it became beautiful. Claire retired from her consulting firm and took up ceramics. She visited twice a month to work in the studio with Gala, gently guiding her through different mediums. They spoke about color and space like they were sharing secrets only artists understood. Core Wild moved on to a tech ethics project in Seattle, but every now and then he sent us encrypted drives with digital scans of Callista's recovered early work, pieces Ivy had hidden in remote storage servers. They were backups, watermarked with timestamps and metadata we now legally owned. Ellis remained close, though less as an attorney and more as a friend. He dropped by occasionally to update us on paperwork, but mostly he just sat with me on the back deck, sipping black coffee and asking about Gala's latest painting. It was quiet, the kind of quiet I used to fear, the kind of quiet I now held close. On the anniversary of Callista's death, Gala and I visited the arboretum where her ashes were scattered. Gala placed a small, hand-painted stone by the base of the willow tree, a soft swirl of pinks and blues with a single gold line down the center. "It's a vein," she explained, "like the one in her wrist. Mommy had golden veins." I smiled, swallowing the lump in my throat. "She'd like that." We sat for a while, just listening to the wind rustle through the branches, and for a brief second, it felt like Callista was right there with us. Not in a ghostly sense, but in the way the light flickered between leaves, in the way Gala tilted her head the same way Callista used to when studying shadows. It wasn't grief. It was memory. It was love. Uncomplicated. Unbroken. Months later, I was invited to a panel discussion at an emerging artists symposium. They wanted me to speak not just about Callista's legacy, but about protecting artistic truth in a world of curated deception. I declined. Not out of bitterness. I just didn't want to reduce Callista to a cautionary tale. She wasn't a warning. She was a story, a person, a force.
She didn't need another panel. She needed to be remembered quietly, in the corners of someone's imagination, where her art stirred something they couldn't quite name. That was enough. That winter, Gala received a scholarship invitation to a pre-college art program, completely unsolicited. I read the letter out loud, and when I finished, she was silent for a moment, then said, "Do you think I got it because of Mommy?" I knelt beside her. "I think you got it because you're good. But what if they only care because of her name? Then show them your work," I said, "and they'll care because of you." She smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that reminded me of Callista, but it was still hers. One evening, I stood alone in the studio, holding one of Gala's new canvases. It was layered, complex. Bold strokes in shades. Callista never used. It pulsed with its own rhythm. She was no longer just painting to remember. She was painting to say something, to begin her own echo. I hung it beside Callista's final portrait, the one of Gala sleeping, mother and daughter, side by side, not in competition, in conversation. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a man preserving the past. I felt like a man standing in the middle of something new, something alive. I don't tell this story for applause. I tell it because silence almost erased everything. I tell it because betrayal comes in beautiful packaging, and healing rarely comes in headlines. I tell it because love, when it's real, survives manipulation, money, and lies. I tell it because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay, not out of weakness, but out of conviction. Because the truth deserves witnesses. Because children deserve untangled stories. Because names deserve to mean what they were born to mean. Because no one gets to rewrite your life unless you let them. And I didn't let them. Not then. Not now. Not ever. In life, we often expect truth to arrive with fanfare. Loud, undeniable, impossible to ignore. But more often, it shows up quietly. In a sealed envelope. In a child's question. In the silence after the storm. This story wasn't just about betrayal or justice. It was about reclaiming what cannot be bought. Dignity, memory, and the right to define our own legacy. Sometimes the deepest strength is not in striking back, but in standing still long enough to let the lies fall away on their own. Healing is rarely neat. It's layered, messy, and slow, but it's also resilient. And when it's done with love, it's powerful beyond words. What we choose to remember, and what we choose to pass on, shapes more than our futures. It protects what was real, even when others tried to rewrite it. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking through this story with us. Your time, your presence, and your reflections mean more than you know. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Until then, stay grounded, stay strong, and keep telling your truth.